And also to have our storyteller here this afternoon. Her name is Gayle Ross, and she's a very renowned storyteller from the Cherokee Nation. So she will be sharing some different Cherokee stories with you here this afternoon. So thank you very much for coming, and I'd like to thank Gayle for being here as well, and I will let her take you away.
Thank you. Sion Nagada Dohiju. Hi guys, how you doing? My name is Gayle Ross, as you heard, and I am an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation. CO, or OCO, is how you say hello in Cherokee. Nagada, friends gathered. Dohiju means how are you? How are you doing? If you're doing good, you say Osta. Excellent. I want to thank first and foremost Mandy and the other members of the staff here at NMAI. I have a long relationship with the museum. To me, it's a very, very important place, a native place on the mall, and I am so grateful and happy to have the opportunity to come back and tell stories here once again. And I want to say hello, especially to my friends in Oklahoma who Facebooked me to tell me they would be tuning into the webcast. It makes me a little nervous to be on the webcast. So now that I've said hello to you guys, I'm going to pretend you're not there and go back to focusing on those of us who are actually here face to face. I am a professional storyteller. That's how I make what I laughingly call a living. I began telling stories when I was very young. My grandmother lived with my family when I was young, and she was the family storyteller and family historian. So from the time I was very small, I just loved stories and Cherokee history. And I travel around the country and sometimes the world. I go to schools and libraries and festivals and colleges and any place someone would like to hear a little bit about our Cherokee stories. And I want to start with a story that is the beginning. I believe it's best to start in the beginning. So I will tell you what Cherokees say about how this world was made. In the beginning days, there was nothing here but water, nothing but a great ocean, and all creatures that lived in the world above. Beyond this polished blue stone, the sky vault that curves from horizon to horizon. But it was getting crowded in the upper world, and Creator said, I will build a middle world, a world that exists in the balance between the upper world, a world of perfect order, and the lower world, a world of complete chaos. And all of the animals that lived in Galant Lati, the upper world, were happy to hear this, and they waited. Every day a different bird would fly, leave the world above, and come down and fly in all four directions across the face of the water. And one by one they would say, there is no place here to build a home. And finally, the little shiny-backed water beetle, the little water beetle, flew down from the world above, swam all the way to the bottom of the sea, and there was Earth. And so that little water beetle scooped up a handful of mud and brought it back and set it floating on top of the water. And they say that from that tiny handful of mud that water beetle carried that day, it stretched and it grew until it became this continent that we walk upon. But it was still soft, soft mud like the ocean floor. So once again, the birds began to fly. Every day, a different bird would come down and fly in all four directions across the earth, and one by one, they would return to say, no, it's still too soft. And when it was Buzzard's turn to fly, and Buzzard had come down and found nothing but soft mud, he grew angry and impatient. He began flying very close to the earth, making a wind with his wings. He dried the land as he flew. And they say that when he reached Cherokee country, He was tired. He flew too close to the earth. And everywhere his wings struck the ground, a valley was carved. And where his wings rose, tall mountains grew. And everyone watching from the world above was afraid he would make the whole world mountains, so they called him home. But if you have been to the homeland of the Cherokee people, the Smoky Mountains, you've seen the beauty that Buzzard created there on that day. And they say that at that time, all creatures came down from the upper world to make this middle world a home. And it is said that Creator, Unetlana, Creator, gave everyone the same original instructions. He said, I have hung this world from the four corners of the sky with 4 silver cords. Live in balance on this earth, or someday those cords may snap and this land will sink back beneath the sea. Now they say that there were many things that had to be done to make this world a home. First, they went to Grandmother Sun. Grandmother Sun lives beyond the sky vault, and they said to her, Grandmother, we need your light and warmth in this middle world. And so she agreed that she would come to the edge of the sky and she would walk a path through the heavens. But the very first day, the Adawahi, the wise ones, they met her there at the edge of the sky. They boosted her 1 handspan into the heavens, but that was much too close. The land was scorched, the mountain streams boiled, and that little crawfish that lives in those streams turned that bright red color. Do you know, for a long time, traditional Cherokee people wouldn't eat crawdads. They said he was cooked so long ago, his meat is probably bad by now. I live on a beautiful little creek in Cherokee County, just north of Tahlequah, and I know that we have gotten over that, because all the Cherokee people I know love to come to my house on the creek and go crawdadding. Sometimes they may take home as much as a 5-gallon barrel of them. Same thing the next day. The Adawahi boosted her another handspan, and then another, until finally, on the 7th day, she found the path that she follows through the heavens. Now, her brother, we call him Uncle Moon, he agreed to bring his soft and gentle light to the evening sky. I see some of you looking at me funny. You've been listening to some of those Plains people, haven't you? They'll tell you the sun is a man, the moon is a woman. We Cherokee people are smarter than that. The sun is all powerful, makes all life possible. Of course she is a woman. The moon is good looking, doesn't do much. Of course he is a man. Now with the Grandmother Sun in the heavens by day and Uncle Moon smiling at night, the world was still a cold and dark place because we had no fire. And Thunder, who lives in the west, controls the wind and the rain and the lightning. Thunder knew that fire would make the lives of the people much better. And so he sent lightning to strike a hollow tree on an island in the middle of a great lake. And the first fire in the middle world was kindled there. And the smoke rose into the heavens. And all the animal people gathered on the shores of that lake, and a great council was held. Everyone wanted to be the one to go and bring that fire back to the people. And after a lot of talk, everyone said, the wisest one should bring the fire. And that was Grandmother Owl. She had no trouble reaching the island. She flew across. But do you know, as wise as she was, she had no experience with the nature of fire. She flew just as she always did, straight to the top of that tree and perched there and looked down. Just as a gust of smoke and ash blew up through that hollow tree as though it were a chimney, and the smoke burned Grandmother Owl's eyes, and the ashes made great white rings on her face. And in her pain, she returned without the fire. And you will know that owl because even today, she wears those white rings. And the people said, well, that didn't work. And so they said, the strongest should go. And that was Bear. Now, Bear had no trouble reaching the island. Bears are very good swimmers. And he had learned from Grandmother Owl. He did not climb to the top of the tree. He circled the base. Have you ever seen a big, dead, hollow tree that has a great split in it where you can climb inside? Bear found that place. And so he squeezed himself into the tree, where the fire was burning bright and hot, and the air was full of smoke and ash, and Bear began to cough and choke. And before he could back out of that tree, he had been burned black from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail. And the bear in the Smoky Mountains is black to this day. Sometimes you see him walking along upright like a two-legged, and then he gives these funny rumbling little coughs. He's still trying to clear all that smoke and ash out of his lungs. And so the people said, well, that didn't work. And so they began to talk some more. Finally, they said, the swiftest among us should go. Someone who can move so fast that they can dart in and get that fire and come right back out before they can get hurt. And they decided that the swiftest was the little blue racer snake. Now, little blue racer snake, he swam across to the island. He went straight to the split in the tree and he dashed inside. But the fire had been burning for so long that now there was a deep bed of hot coals there. And the poor little snake began to twist and turn and dodge and dart. And by the time he came back out, he was not the little blue racer snake anymore. He was the little black racer snake. And he swam back without the fire. And the people said, well, that didn't work. And so they began to talk some more. And finally they said, the handsomest, the best looking among us, let the prettiest one go. Maybe if the prettiest one goes, the fire will be so dazzled that that one can grab a piece of that fire and come right back out. And the prettiest animal in the beginning days of the world was the rainbow crow. The rainbow crow had all the colors of the light dancing and shimmering in his feathers. Every time he turned or flew or circled and the light shone, a different color would appear. And the rainbow crow was very proud of his good looks. He said, I will fly over there. That fire will be so dazzled by my good looks. I can snatch a piece of that fire and come back while the fire is looking at me. So Rainbow Crow flew over. He dove straight down through the top of that tree. But when he came out the bottom, he had flown directly through the fire. And no longer did all the colors of the rainbow shimmer from his feathers. The crow that we see today is as black as the black bear and the black snake. So when Rainbow Crow got back, everyone said, well, that didn't work. And they started talking some more, and they heard one tiny little voice speaking up. It was the little water spider, the one that does that dance like this on top of the creeks and the rivers. Water spider said, let me go. Let me try. And everyone started laughing and laughing. You are too little. What can you do that owl and bear and the racer snake, and the rainbow crow, all of them have tried. All of them have failed. What makes you think you could do better? And Bear, when he saw how much the words of the others had hurt little water spider's feelings, he stood up, he said, "She is small, but her heart is big. Let her go." And so the people agreed that the little water spider should try to bring the fire. Little water spider, she had no trouble reaching the island. She danced across. And she didn't rush in the way the others had done. She sat down outside that tree. She began to spin her web thread around and around and around until she had made a little bowl. She took mud from the shore of the lake and she lined the inside of that bowl and she tied it on her back. And reaching in, she took one tiny coal of fire and she placed it in her bowl and she danced back to the people. And you know, they say from that tiny coal of fire that Grandmother Spider carried on that day were all 7 sacred fires of the Cherokee people lit. Now, sacred fire was very important. It burned in the townhouses of the 7 Cherokee peace or refuge towns, tended at all times, never allowed to go out. Every year around Green Corn Dance time, the council hearth would be swept clean and a new fire would be laid, but it was lit with coals from the sacred fire of the year before. And in that way, that living fire was handed down from one generation to the next. And they say that in that time of great trouble, in that time when 16,000 Cherokee people were rounded up at gunpoint and forced all the way from their Smoky Mountain homeland to Oklahoma, where we are now, there were those who carried coals of that sacred fire with them. They burn now at the ceremonial grounds in the Cookson Hills. And when you look at that little spider, look at her back. The white bowl she carried left a mark, a white circle on her back. And they say that when the coal of fire was taken from that bowl, the mud that she had lined that bowl with, it had turned hard, and that's how Cherokee women made pottery, was learning from that little Grandmother Spider. And you can see that image of little Grandmother Spider now. Cherokee artists, Cherokee potters, Cherokee silversmiths, they love to make the image of the little water spider with the circle on her back because it teaches us something very important. We're taught to remember that one of the greatest gifts of light and warmth, our living sacred fire, came to the Cherokees not from the biggest, the strongest, the wisest, the fastest, or even the best looking, but from one of the smallest and gentlest of our animal brothers and sisters, Wado. Thank you. I really love that story. It's one of the stories that you hear a lot of different versions of, and it was out here in the East on a Cherokee storyteller that I met from the Eastern Band who told me that little part about Grandmother Spider lining the bowl with mud and Cherokee women learning how to make pottery. She was a wonderful potter. Many of you may have read about the Trail of Tears in history. The Trail of Tears really is a term that refers to the forced removal of all 5 of the civilized tribes, Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Creek. But the Cherokee experience was perhaps the worst of all because the Cherokee did not sign a treaty and go. They fought Jackson under the leadership of my great-great-great-grandfather, John Ross. They took the state of Georgia, who had confiscated our lands, extended her jurisdiction over us, in a court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court found on behalf of the Cherokee people. They said that the Cherokees were a domestic dependent nation with their own government, their own set of laws. This was their country, and the state of Georgia had no right to force the Cherokees away from their home. At which point Andrew Jackson became the only president in the history of the United States to openly defy the Supreme Court. He is said to have remarked, "John Marshall has made his decision, let him enforce it." And to the Georgians, he said, "Light a fire under them, they'll move." And the violence that had been for so long pervasive on the Cherokees in the territory that Georgia claimed became so bad that one small faction of the tribe, believing that they had no choice but to move, gave Jackson the treaty that he wanted, the Treaty of New Echota, which ceded the land east of the Mississippi for land in what it was then called Indian Territory. And the Cherokees, like I said, fought. They took it to court. They won. But when the grace period in the treaty had expired, federal troops moved in, and they rounded up the Cherokee people at gunpoint, 16,000 Cherokee people, beginning in the spring of 1838. And the first death tolls were so horrific. Summer was not a healthy time to travel. They were so bad that the march was halted until October, when it was hoped that there would be better weather. And instead, the worst winter ever recorded at that time struck, and so more Cherokees died in that forced removal. All told, they believed that a quarter of the tribe, about 4,000 Cherokees, died on the Trail of Tears. My own great-great-great-grandmother, Chief Ross's wife, Quady, was among them. She died on board a flatboat on the Arkansas River just south of Little Rock. She's buried there. But there was one small band of Cherokees that escaped removal. North Carolina had passed a law making them citizens of the state. They were called the Citizen Indians. And so if you go down to the Qualla boundary today in western North Carolina, you can meet the Cherokee people there, the Eastern Band of Cherokees. And there's a lot of visiting back and forth between the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma and the Eastern Band in Qualla. And I love that Eastern Band story about how making pottery came at that same time as the first fire did, because there are so many gifted and talented Cherokee potters. It is that, and our basket weavers are some of the most prized in trade with other native people. Our pottery and our baskets were very highly prized, and many, many talented artists carry on those traditions even now. And also at that same time, in the beginning, when all creatures spoke the same language, or as my grandmother would say, the days when the animals could talk, the people could understand them, and except for killing and eating each other, everybody got along pretty good. In those days, they say, lived the first man and the first woman. And they were husband and wife, which is, and it says, the story says, they loved one another dearly. They spent their days discovering the wonders of this beautiful world and their nights discovering the wonders of each other. But for those of you who are married, the honeymoon doesn't always last. There came a time when that first man and that first woman had their first fight. And later, neither could remember what the quarrel was even about. But at the time, harsh and ugly words flew back and forth between them. And finally, in anger and in grief, the woman turned and walked away. She was going east toward grandmother's son as she rose. Well, the man sat alone in his house. He told himself how peaceful and quiet it was without that woman. But you know, as time passed and he forgot his anger, he became very, very lonely. He thought about all the wonderful times that he and his wife had shared. He thought about the love and the respect that they had always given each other. And he felt so bad about the fight that they had had that he dropped his head into his hands and he began to cry. And Uneklana, Creator, the maker of all good things, heard that man crying and said, "Man, why do you cry?" The man said, "My wife left me." Creator said, "Why did she leave?" And the man hung his head and wouldn't answer. "You quarreled with her. I could hear you." And the man nodded. "Tell me this," said Creator. "If she came back to you now, would you treat her that way again?" And the man said no. He wanted to live the way they had lived before, in peace, in happiness, and in love. And so Creator said, "Well, then I will tell you. I've seen your wife. She's walking east." So the man began following her, but he couldn't overtake her. Everyone knows an angry woman walks fast. Creator said, "Let me see if I can make her slow down." So Creator went on ahead and found the woman. She was doing that walk. Some of you may have seen this walk. Some of you may have done this walk. Fast, furious footsteps, gaze fixed straight ahead, mumbling to herself. She was still angry. Creator said, "I need to make her slow down." So he put sarvisberry bushes by the trail, caused them to burst into bloom and ripen into fruit, thinking the woman would stop and pick the berries and eat. But you know, she couldn't even see them. She was gazing straight ahead, anger still in her heart. She swept right by them. Creator put blackberry bushes by the trail, caused them to burst into bloom and ripen into fruit, and still the woman kept walking. She could see nothing but her anger, and her footsteps did not slow. Finally, Creator said, "I will make an entirely new kind of fruit, one that grows close to the ground, because only by bending her head for a moment will the woman forget this anger." So a thick green carpet began to grow along the trail the woman was following. It was starred with tiny white flowers, and each flower ripened into a berry that was the color and the shape of the human heart. And as the woman was walking, she stepped on some of those berries and crushed them under her feet, and this wonderful smell rose. So she stopped and looked down. And there were all those tiny, beautiful red berries growing in profusion all along the trail she was following. She couldn't resist. She reached down and picked one and ate it, and its taste was as sweet as love itself. And so now she was walking very slowly, picking those berries as she went, and she saw her husband coming behind her. And do you know, the anger was gone from her heart. When she saw him, all she remembered was how much they loved one another, how much they took care of each other. And so she sat down to wait for him. And when he came up to her, she shared those wonderful berries with him. And you know, the story says They lived out their days in peace and in happiness and in love. I've been married 32 years. I bet they had another fight or two. But never again did the woman walk away from the home that they had made together. And that's how Creator made strawberries. They're the color and the shape of the human heart, the sweetest tasting of all the berries. Cherokee people say they were put here to bring peace between men and women. And even today, Cherokee women keep strawberries in the kitchen. In spring when they're fresh, and then you bake with them, you make strawberry pie, even if it's just a jar of strawberry jam. Cherokee women say, if there is strawberries in the kitchen, there will be peace in the house. Wado. When I was young, I love stories. I love to learn stories. I love to memorize stories. When I was a very annoying kid sometimes, but at campouts, I was the one who could tell you why the North Star stood still. I was the one at the slumber party with the really spooky ghost stories. And the stories that are for young people among the Cherokee people are the Chistu rabbit stories. Rabbit is always in trouble. He's just a troublemaker. And he loves to play tricks. Sometimes his tricks work out just the way he wants. Sometimes they backfire and he hurts only himself. Like the time he made Bear so mad, Bear reached out, grabbed that beautiful bushy tail of Rabbit's and broke it off. That's how come rabbits only have that little puff of white fur. He talks all the time. He talks all the time. You cannot make Rabbit stop talking. Creator picked him up and said, "You don't listen. I'm going to help you listen better." Took Rabbit's ears. And so come Rabbit's ears stick up. He talked so much in the beginning days of the world that the other animal people made him the messenger. They figured he was going to be talking anyway. They might as well give him something to say. And that meant he had to go to the animal tribal council meetings. Like I say, you have to remember, these are the days when animal and people society mirrored one another. The animals had a tribal council, they had our dances, they had stickball games, and Rabbit had to go to the council meetings, but they wouldn't let him inside. Well, in the old days, I'm told, tribal council meetings were where you had to be very polite. You couldn't interrupt somebody. So if Rabbit got in the council house and started talking, no one could interrupt him and the meetings would last 4 months. So they made him sit outside. And he was sitting outside the council house one day. He had his rattle with him. There was going to be a stomp dance that night. Rabbit loves stomp dances. Free food, pretty girls. And he thought while he was waiting, he'd just make himself up a little song and sing and loosen up his voice a little. So he started singing. Chistu, not-da-nay. Chistu, not-da-nay. Can you sing that with me? Just Chistu, not-da-nay. Chistu, not-da-nay. Chistu, not-da-nay. Rabbit, rabbit, what's that sound? And of course, what rabbit really means is, it's the sound of my beautiful voice. And the better he felt, the louder he sang, the better he felt, until in the council house, they couldn't hear themselves think. And Eagle looked down at the sergeant at arms, that's Bullfrog. He said, "You go out there, you make him be quiet." Bullfrog puffed himself up as big as he could. He hopped outside. There was Rabbit shaking his rattle and singing. Bullfrog jumped up, knocked the rattle out of his hand. Rabbit stopped singing, looked down, and Bullfrog said, "Eagle says, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet." And he hopped back inside. Rabbit waited till the door closed. He's a cute little fella, picked up his rattle. Chistu, not-da-nay. Chistu, not-da-nay. Inside the council house, Eagle looked down at Bullfrog and said, "Oh yeah, good job. You showed him. I need somebody bigger than Bullfrog. Fox, you go out there. You make him be quiet." So Fox went outside. There was Rabbit shaking his rattle and singing. Fox reached out, grabbed Rabbit's right arm, and popped it off. And the rattle fell to the ground. Fox said, "I'll give this back to you when the council meeting is over." And she stuck Rabbit's arm in her pocket and headed back inside. Rabbit waited till the door closed behind her and said, Geese do, not the nay. Geese do, not the nay. Inside the council house, Eagle said, somebody bigger than Fox. Wolf, you go out there. You make him be quiet. So Wolf went outside. There's Rabbit shaking his rattle and singing. Wolf grabbed Rabbit's left arm and popped it off. And the rattle dropped to the ground. Wolf said, "I'll give this back to you when the council meeting is over." And he stuck Rabbit's arm in his pocket and headed back inside. Rabbit waited till the door closed and said, Geese do, not the nay. Geese do, not the nay. Inside the council house, Eagle said, "All right, Bear, you get out there. You make him be quiet." So Bear went out there. There's Rabbit singing, keeping time with his foot. Bear reached out, grabbed both Rabbit's legs, and popped them off. And Rabbit fell to the ground. Bear said, "Eagle says I can give these back to you when the council meeting is over." And he stuck Rabbit's legs in his pocket and headed back inside. Rabbit's lying there on the ground, watching the clouds go by. After a while, he says, Geese do, not the nay. Geese do, not the nay. Singing, keeping time with his head. Inside, Eagle said, "All right, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself." So he went out there. He reached down, he grabbed Rabbit's head and popped it off. "I'll give this back to you when the council meeting is over." And he stuck Rabbit's head in his pocket and headed back inside. But you know, the door had barely closed when they heard, very faint, Geese do, not the nay. They couldn't believe it. Everybody rushed outside. They gathered around that gray, furry, jelly bean-shaped looking thing lying on the ground. Eagle put his head down and listened, and then he looked up at the others and he said, "He's singing with his heart." "Oh," I said Bear. He took Rabbit's legs out, he popped them on him, stood him up. Fox and Wolf put his arms back. Eagle put his head back on. They handed him his rattle. You see, the all-knowing, all-wise tribal council had learned a lesson from Rabbit. And it's what I hope you remember whenever you think of this story. You have a voice. If your voice speaks the truth, sings the truth, or dances the truth. You have a voice. Lend your voice only to the truth. Let it come from your heart. And they can take you apart one piece at a time, but they will never silence your voice. Gistu, nada, nay. Gistu, nada, nay. Wado, thank you. And thank you. And thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming out to spend a part of the day here at the museum. There's so much to see and explore and do and learn here. I hope that you take the time, and I hope you come back to see us many, many times. Thank you so much.